Hey pole dancer, welcome to the Evidence-Based Pole Podcast. My name is Rosie Boa. I'm a pole dancer, pole teacher, and personal trainer. And I've started this podcast so that we can learn together, talk with the experts, read the research, and feel better on and off the pole. So if that sounds like something you're interested in doing, let's go. Welcome to the Evidence-Based Pole Podcast. And I am here today with someone, I don't know, I guess folks might know you from Instagram. I don't know that there's a whole lot of overlap, which makes you the perfect guest. Henri Hänninen, who is a Finnish, your parkour coach, you're a circus teacher, you're a strength and conditioning coach. But the reason I wanted to have you on is that you're also a big nerd, likewise, and particularly interested in flexibility. And we mentioned maybe talking about a little bit about periodization, skill acquisition, motor learning. So a lot of things that I think a lot about, and I know pole dancers, y'all have questions about. So just coming into it, would you like to give us a little bit more about your background, how you got into movement, what your day-to-day is like? I don't know, do you have any experience with pole? Because I think Finnish pole, and I'm like immediately like, Una K. If any of y'all don't know Una K, you should. She's one of the greats. Really, really fabulous. Yeah, have you done pole?
I've done a little bit, but I haven't ever trained it consistently. But I've done it also on stage a few times for a short performance thing where it's mostly contemporary dance and then some pole tricks just because I can, phoenix quite nicely by just having an aerialist background. But I've never really trained it consistently, but I have quite many strength and conditioning clients who are either recreational pole artists or athletes, or then competitors who are competing in either the sporty version or the artsy version, whichever,
So definitely familiar with the demands of the apparatus, let's put it that way.
But yeah, my own movement background started in my 20s, because as a kid I mostly played video games, and as a teenager I played electric guitar, and then with that super impressive background, during my first university year, I found a random parkour course, and then that kind of completely blew my mind and drew me in. And then I really got into all kinds of movement. Parkour was the first thing. And since I didn't have any kind of background in any kind of movement practice, I wasn't really active as a kid. I felt like I don't have the kind of head start that, people who kind of grow into it have. So I need to be very smart about how I train. And so I started to look up information on how to train in a way that brings me fast results, because I was a dumb young adult who wanted fast results. And then at that time I was a chemistry student, and that kind of drew me into different internet forums and other, as credible sources. And then a few years after that, I found out that there's a thing called biology of physical activity that you can study in the university. And then I was like, that's the place to get info. And so I got into sports science basically because of, initially it was because I wanted to know how I could train. But then it quickly turned into how I could also help others train, or how I could coach. But yeah, parkour was the first thing and the thing that but pretty soon after that I also found aerial silks and then some different floor acro things, and then it kind of expanded from there. And of all the things I have done, basically parkour and aerial silks, and to a smaller extent aerial rope, are the ones that I have done professionally, in a sense that I have, paid my rent by performing with them or in them. And then I've taught parkour and aerials and other acro disciplines for some years. But yeah, I got into movement quite late, relatively late, and now it's like maybe 13 years into that journey?
I'd say that's very relatable, especially to me. I was also a nerdy kid. I did not want to do physical things. Like, I'd go to the library during recess instead of, running around and playing, because I didn't want to do that. So yeah, and I also came to pole as an adult. I think most people do. Yeah, and then sort of went out to pole from other things, but I'm predominantly a pole dancer as a mover and exclusively a pole coach. I really only do the one thing, and personal training. But let's start. We teased this, and I think it's going to be the thing that pole dancers are going to be most intrigued by. Let's talk a little bit about flexibility, because my students will be sick of hearing this. We've only sort of recently, on the research side of things, gotten a good understanding of like the mechanics of what makes flexibility changes happen. And obviously that's something in pole that a lot of movements require an extreme range of flexibility when compared to, just sort of the general population. And a lot of the adaptations are in the nervous system, even though also you do want strength. So do you want to start by talking about just what are some really common misconceptions you run into that people have about flexibility, and specifically flexibility training?
Yeah, there are. I think one of the most common is a misconception around what is the foundational thing and what is the thing that applies the foundational thing. As in, people often think, or at least before they have well, I don't know if it's the case anymore, but I run it quite a lot into the notion that you need to have the kind of passive range of motion for the joint before you can do something more active with it. And this is one of the most common things, and that's quite misleading, because flexibility doesn't really work like that. It's a weird, complex phenomenon that is affected by so many different things. It's like one, and with that comes all the I should probably stretch more, and then the kind of influence that has on how people train and how they feel guilty for neglecting some parts of training, and how they kind of interpret how the body is supposed to feel in different movements.
Yeah.
That's probably the most.
I think folks with a dance background here in the US will definitely have been told, like, oh, you should stretch while you're watching TV and just like sit in your splits for 30 minutes a day, and that's how you're gonna get, a beautiful leap. Or like in pole, if you just sit in your splits, you'll get a flat jade, which is just unfortunately not the case.
Yeah, not the case. And another misconception, or a series of misconceptions, also has to do with misleading appearances. Similar might have totally different like patterns of activation or ways of loading in terms of different structures within the body. So like splits on the floor versus a leap where you need to jump and do it fast, versus something where you have to lift them open, versus, Russian split isn't the same as a split on the floor, although it kind of looks similar. So that's one, but that's also kind of related to the first one, where, when you combine these two, it kind of does weird things for how people view training, or what kind of decisions they do regarding flexibility training.
So I think you've sort of brought up one thing that I think it's becoming more common for people to talk about in the pole space, which is that just passive stretching is not, depending on what your specific goals are, just passive stretching is not necessarily going to help you achieve them. There's certainly pole movements where you do just need a passive range to get into them, and those, I'm trying to come up with a really good example here of one of those. Hold, please. I'm going through the Rolodex.
Yeah, I think there are quite many where, like, for example, the different front split variations where it's quite passive for the front leg, and then a little bit active for the back leg, but not too much.
Yeah, I'm thinking like splits up the pole, right? Because you're pulling your body, and your leg just sort of has to be there and give you the space to move. But we sort of mentioned that like that's going to be different from Russian splits, jade splits, something where you are moving yourself into that position and not just, using the resistance of the pole to give you a point to move against. Chain something. Yeah. So that's definitely something that I think is becoming, there's more awareness of in pole, as that just passive stretching is not necessarily going to help you achieve all of your movement goals, depending on what they are specifically. But, having worked with pole artists, are there any common patterns you see of not necessarily mistakes, but training practices that are not very efficient or a good use of time? Let's put it that way.
Well, in terms of mobility training, well, there are two things where I think I'm gonna put this in two broad categories. One is different things regarding flexibility training, and then one is confusing or combining strength work with skill work, or trying to get stronger by skill work. And those are the two different things. And the flexibility training, I see this, how should I put it? Because people are different in terms of what comes easily for them. And for some, it's super easy to relax into wider ranges, and the kind of passive flexibility comes quite easily for them. And then all the different stretching things that are aimed at that feel super easy and light for those people. And because this is kind of a flexibility, this is a sport that uses flexibility a lot, those people tend to be, for some reason, many coaches tend to be this type of people. And then if you're in a group and you are not one of these people, they might have a hard time understanding that it's totally different for, someone for whom, for example, the kind of relaxed flexibility doesn't come that easily, but is a weird rabbit hole that goes into different types of mobility, and what are the actual foundational aspects and how you should think about it. But I think it's the kind of selection or survivorship bias that kind of creates a situation where the people who tend to be the ones who make their living out of this tend to be more often the ones for whom certain types of flexibility training comes easily, and it's not relatable for most people. I think this was a confusing way of saying it, but yeah.
No, I think that makes sense, and I don't think either of us are the first person to observe this, and I know for a fact or not that pole in particular tends to really attract hypermobile folks, because it can be easier to get into a position, whether or not that's great for your long-term longevity as a mover. Getting into a position a specific way, depends on you and your training.
But for example, it's one of those sports or arts where for example, my case of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome might be quite beneficial for some performance aspects, but whatever. This is a weird rabbit hole. Let's not go into this one for now.
The skill training as strength training, huge pet peeve of mine.
Because this is the kind of, should I get stronger for pole or by pole? And the recreational hobbyist who just does something a couple of times a week, sure, you can get strong by doing the skill stuff. It's probably good. Don't worry too much about it. But if and when you get to higher level, there comes a point where you kind of want to build a situation where you are strong enough to make the skill things light to you. So, because I think many listeners have the experience that if some trick or skill is currently at your absolute maximal strength level, then you can try it like 2 times in a session, and then it's kind of over, and then, see you in a couple of days. Let's try it again then, and then you can get 2 actual trials, and then it's over again. And then if it's at your maximal capacity, then it's also a bit more risky than if it was, light and easy for you. And the kind of adaptations that strength work does versus skill work, even in the neural level, they are kind of different. And skill training or improvement in many different things happen in the nervous system, and the spine adapts as well, and the brain. But if I simplify it way too much, most meaningful changes happen at the reorganization of different maps and patterns at the sensory and motor cortex. So you get new patterns and new pathways there, and the map kind of calibrates itself on what is possible and what is easy and how to organize different movements. And that kind of change is in part driven by, complexity and kind of cognitive difficulty and variation and reps without repetition, and kind of always trying to do something new or changing it a bit or doing it in different circumstances or combining it in a different new way. That's easier and safer to do if the thing isn't too heavy for you. And then if we go to the maximal strength part, there are many different muscular adaptations and then adaptations with the connective tissue and the extracellular matrix, but also the neural changes of maximal strength training include elements of skill learning or the same kind of reorganization of the maps. But there's a different thing, that the most meaningful thing that comes with maximal strength training is that basically the level of basal ganglia or brainstem, there are these kind of inhibitory structures that limit your force production in order to keep all movements safer. And maximal strength training mostly alters that level. So skill training, the top part of the brain, the surface structure; strength training, the lower part. And one key difference is that the changes that maximal strength work does are driven by intensity and heavy effort. And it's very difficult and often counterproductive to try to combine the kind of complexity and variation with the kind of high intensity and effort. Because things need to be simple and safe enough that you can repeat them with high enough intensity and kind of push the boundaries there by going heavier and harder. Whereas I think you see the difference. And so if you're at all serious about getting better in whatever sport you choose, pole dancing, it might be a good idea to organize your strength training in a way that's separate from the skill work, and that the goal is to become so strong that your skill work is not strength work for you.
My students will know that my conditioning classes and my pole classes are separate for a very good reason. I like to think of it as sort of, you have your capacity for a specific movement, right? Which, just like this is your physical, mental strength, flexibility, capacity to do a specific thing. And then you have a specific movement and sort of the range of how you can do it, right? If your capacity overlaps just a little bit with the tiny bottom edge of the most progressive part of the movement, again, like you said, you can do maybe one or two. But particularly for folks who are really interested in the dance aspect and making things look easy and playing with them and having that variability practice that you mentioned, then you want to focus on movements that are well within, your envelope of capacity. And that even if you're doing the hardest version of it, you are still going to be able to, execute it successfully multiple times, with different sort of perturbations thrown in there, right? And particularly, for the people who are thinking about performing, you go up, the pole is slippery. If you're like, I put in a trick that I can only do, if the wind's right and the moon's aligned, and now the pole's a little bit slippery, it's just not happening. But if you're like, I'm doing the trick that I could do first thing in the morning right after I roll out of bed with no warm-up, probably it'll be fine, even though that situation has changed. Yeah. So I think it's a really healthy way to think about training for pole. And also, I teach online. I can't hold people's butts. I cannot give you a spot. I don't want you doing something that you have a high probability of failing at. I would like you to train your pole stuff well within that envelope of just like physical capacity, and then, you know, push the strength training to later. Yeah. And of course, you know, different types of learning. So you'd also want rest in between them as well, ideally.
Yep. Everything becomes so much easier and more fun when it's, at least for most people, it's easier and more fun, more enjoyable and more fun to do things that are light and you can actually play around with them.
Yeah. Plus, you're going to be more successful. And I have certainly, you know, had training spans or worked with particular trainers. So I was like, everything you asked me to do, I just can't do. And I feel horrible. And I don't have a good time. And I don't want to come back. And usually it's just like there's a level mismatch or capacity mismatch, or just like such a level of physical difference. I have very, very short arms. So sometimes people will be like, everything we're doing today is very easy for me, a person who has long arms. So like, I physically can't. They don't reach. So we sort of like hinted at it a little bit, you know, so separating your training, you know, and again, I would say if you're doing pole a couple times a week, let's say 3+, maybe one of those becomes a strength and conditioning training, maybe, if you're interested. Nudge. You should do your cross training. But I know another thing that you have done a lot of work on and are very knowledgeable about is periodization. So do you want to talk a little bit about what is that? And then specifically thinking about, you know, aerialists, sort of more artistic athletes, what are some things that we should think about?
Yeah. As a term, I think periodization or periodizing your training as a concept, if it's unfamiliar to some listeners, the main point is that periodization deals in longer timelines, and it kind of outlines how training is organized in a month-by-month basis or on a yearly basis. And then programming is the term that's used for all the kind of daily stuff regarding exercise selection and the order of exercises or the organization within a training week. So what kind of training sessions and what do they include? But periodization is when you kind of main headlines and some subtitles to your months and organize your training in a more long-term fashion. And there are very many different periodization models and also countless programming schemes that go with them. And most of them, I think also the one that I gravitate towards most often kind of uses the kind of logic where it builds from general to specific, and from the kind of foundational, very general attributes and skills to the more specific, sport-specific or art-specific stuff. So in essence, the point is to kind of first widen the foundation and kind of solidify it, and then start to sharpen the peak above it, and then go back to widening the foundation, and then again to sharpening the peak. So it's kind of like a cyclical process that covers longer timelines, because long-term progress isn't really about what happens within a single training session, because it's a signal and a stimulus to your body. It's you communicating what you'd like your body to do, and then your body remembers it for a couple of days and initiates some processes and stuff like that. But then it's kind of over. So the training session itself matters for a bit, but way more influential is how the next training week will differ from this week, or how the next month will differ from this month, or how the next year will be different from this year. So periodization kind of takes the bigger picture. And yeah.
And I brought that up because I think for pole students, they have more control over like, okay, I'm going to take a series here, a series there, and I've got this performance coming up. And that's something you can control a little bit more than like specifically what you do in class. Although hopefully, if you're taking classes, your instructor has thought about this and that's part of their calculus. And something that you mentioned is, I guess, sort of dovetails with something that I think about is like, not every skill training session is going to feel amazing, right? There's going to be some degree of failure. And I like to think, about a third, you should be like, yeah, I had a great time. And about a third, you'll be like, I tried a lot of stuff and it didn't happen today. But I hope most people have had this experience where like you're training a new pole trick, it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. You move away from it for a little bit, and then one day it just shows up. You just like get on the apparatus and bop, it's there in your body, the learning has happened, it's been incorporated, maybe you built your capacity so that it's, available to you physically, and it's a great feeling. But it does mean that you have to go through those sessions that are like a little bit struggle bus.
And also it's funny because some learning methods regarding skill acquisition work in a way that it doesn't really show very rapid within session success, but it brings faster and more durable, more permanent results between the sessions. And these kind of include the repetition without repetition. So constantly varying the thing and kind of giving your body a new puzzle to solve instead of offering it a already solution for the thing and kind of just going through the correct pattern over and over again. So if you kind of change it. Also, another thing you could incorporate in this is the kind of random order practice where you're kind of always training a few things in the same session, and you can organize them in a very blocked order where you first focus on one thing and then move on to the next one and then to the next one, versus a random order where you try one thing for a while and then go to the second one and then go back to the one thing and then do the third thing and then back to the first and then the second, and kind of randomly varying them. And both of these solutions, the high amount of variation or the confusing within session structure that has you initiate the learning process over and over again instead of progressing in it, both of these can feel very frustrating and they don't yield that great results within the session. But when you look at all kinds of retention tests or how you're doing a couple of days from now, or how well do you remember the thing a couple of weeks from now, these kind of random order confounding factors have made the learning way more effective and the permanent way more permanent in a way. So it's more effective, you get to a higher level, but also the results are more permanent. But this is very counterintuitive and weird. And one way to kind of describe how it works or why it works this way is that, I think I already kind of said this, if you give your body or your nervous system a weird puzzle to solve, then it will keep working on the puzzle even after you stop working on it. Versus if you just give it a movement pattern without anything to solve, ready movement thing that you brainlessly go through over and over again, then the process when you stop doing it. So it's not about the amount of repetition. That's not really a factor. It's the process of trying to do something new.
I'm saying this with kindness in my heart, and I want everyone to know this, but a well-designed program to help you learn as efficiently as possible is going to be like the opposite of ballet class. It's like the worst way that you can organize it for motor learning principles.
That is true. And then for all the coaches out there, so if you are doing weekly classes where people keep showing up, then do include these confounding factors and random order practice and lots of variation. And then if you are giving one workshop at a random weekend where you never see the people again and you need to give them some experience of, improving within that thing as much as possible, then avoid these. Just do the block order thing and just give them some repetition, and then they feel like they improve a lot, but that's not, probably keeps them moving. So, all of these have their uses and yeah.
Yeah, my students will know that my pole classes are organized on a monthly basis, and we have like a movement theme, but we don't usually actually do the same movements every week. We do different movements in a different order, right, and play with them in different ways. And a big part of that is I want you to be able to do stuff in freestyle and just have it arrive when you need it. And for that in particular, you really got to have the motors need to be learned all the way. Got to be in the body.
Yes. It's also a very fun example of how it goes against everything that we know to support learning. Like, having a sense of agency and having some control over what happens within the session, that has demonstrably been, that accelerates and supports learning. Even if the choices that you are allowed to make are kind of superficial and don't really affect anything, like, in which order do you do these exercises that I have, prescribed for you, or which pole do you choose, or what. I think the many examples where this has been started in a lab setting, it's like usually throwing something accurately, and if you get to choose what color of ball you throw, you are more accurate versus if it's just given to you. But yeah. And then also the kind of definition of failure, or how allowing you are for different variations or different outcomes. This has also been shown that if you kind of broaden the definition of failure in an accuracy setting, or stuff like that, this would kind of mean like broadening the goal in a very concrete way, or stuff like that. This actually has been shown to lead to higher level and greater accuracy than keeping a very strict, very narrow definition of success and treating everything else as a failure. So demanding perfection does not lead to perfection. It's the opposite. Allowing for variation leads to higher level. And this is also, one example where ballet class is a great opposite example.
Yeah.
You don't get to choose a lot, and there's the only one correct way, and nothing else is. No. But I don't know. Maybe ballet has changed. I doubt it, but
possibly.
Yeah.
And then thinking about it in the pole space, what provides you as a mover more agency than freestyle dance? And for my freestyle classes, I let students pick the songs, right? And I think certainly as a student, I know like if I get to pick the song and like do what I want, I have a great time, and also I am way more technically proficient, right? Like the highest level of technical proficiency I've ever achieved in pole has been freestyling to a song that I picked in a social environment where I felt very supported. So an anecdote in this evidence-based podcast, but I've also noticed that very much so in my students as well. So.
Yeah. And if we nerd around a little bit about why this is, the role of motivation, and when I say motivation, I mean the kind of emergent property that is best described by self-determination theory and stuff like that. So the motivation is something that emerges from the circumstances, and the things that help it emerge have to do with the sense of agency, sense of safety, sense of accomplishment, or the sense of moving into the right direction. But the nerdy part has to do with how dopamine affects quite a lot of things, and motivation has both direct and indirect effect into supporting learning or getting results. And the indirect obvious thing is that if you are motivated to do something, you are more likely to do it, and it's easier to get better at something you are doing than something you are avoiding for reasons of it not being motivating. But then the direct effect is that because of structures or pathways in the dopaminergic circuits of basal ganglia work. If you are motivated, it essentially changes the chemical circumstances within your nervous system in a way that the skill training that you do while you are motivated does more changes. It actually increases the kind of plasticity, and it makes it easier to make those changes that make skill training happen and that make it permanent. And then, so yeah, if you're motivated and if you like what you are doing, you are actually improving more than if you're just grinding through something you don't like. And this is both encouraging and also a little bit depressing, because if you are totally unmotivated in something, you probably don't see that much gains from it. It's not that you don't see any, and usually if you get some proficiency in something you used to hate, you might start to like it, and it's, for many things, it might be worth trying to see if that happens. But if it doesn't, then might not be your thing or whatever. But yeah, motivation means a lot.
Yeah, and it can definitely be a catch-22. This is something that we've actually been talking about recently quite a bit in my studio. Like, sometimes we just don't want to do the thing. And we were talking about it in the context of not wanting to go train, but then once you're actually training, you're like, yay, behavioral activation. Yeah. I'm having a fun time here. And I think, especially for recreational bowlers, if there's something and you've tried it for a while and you've given it the old college try and you're like, I hate wearing heels, you don't gotta wear heels. You're an adult. You can just say no. But if you do enjoy it and you want to keep working at it. Also, something you mentioned about, motivation and enjoyment being linked with skill learning. But I think, particularly in American culture, we can be very, puritanical and against the idea that people should have fun and that pleasure is important in any capacity. And it is. It's really important just to you enjoying being a human being, but also it really affects how your body reacts to new situations and, affects motor learning. And I think it can be very easy to never learn about or to forget about, particularly in my cultural context. I don't know if it's the same for you, but certainly something.
Yeah. If the space is full of all these grind set influencers, it's kind of hard to remember that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the hashtag every damn day hashtag. Please don't train every day. Listen, if you get nothing else from this episode, please don't train every day. Especially, if this is your hobby, you gotta take rest days. You gotta take breaks.
Yeah. It's more safe, and it also makes you progress even more, because the time between the training sessions is when all the most meaningful adaptations occur, even the neural stuff, but especially all the muscular stuff or the stuff regarding connective tissue.
Yeah. Take breaks. They're not optional. I mean, if you treat them as optional, they will quickly become mandatory.
Yeah. And it's good to, going back to periodization or planning, bigger picture, it's good to have a couple of rest days a week and then a lighter week in each month. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a lighter month once each year or stuff like that. So, and in terms of those, it's really good to sessions or the lighter days or the lighter weeks and try to be proactive with them so that you're, taking it easy a little bit before you would actually have to back off. So do it before it becomes necessary, and then you can just keep going consistently and,
My students know this, but this month, August, is actually our deload month for the studio. Usually we have every fourth week is a deload week, and our show is next month because I want everyone to be rested and then be able to get into the stuff for their show. So we are coming up on time, and I know you are a busy person and I don't want to keep you too long, but if folks wanted to work with you or, hear more from you, I know you do a lot of Finnish language stuff. We also have English language stuff. I guess some of my listeners may be Finnish speakers, in which case they have more options. But how could people work with you what other things do you have going on? Is there anything you'd like to plug? Bad transition, but you know what I mean.
Well, I'm in the process of getting more stuff in English out there. But yeah, as soon as that goes forward, you can find information at least in my Instagram. So, and then with a couple of colleagues, I'm also doing stuff under the Artformance, which is, it started out as a Circus 2.0 type of thing where we try to update the practices around circus stuff, but it kind of broadened into other things. But that's also, yeah, we're planning on doing seminars in English with that as well. But whenever stuff comes out, my Instagram will let you know.
Definitely, and that will be linked below. And also, if you're watching this on Instagram, I guess you wouldn't be watching this part on Instagram, but also check my most recent Instagram post when this comes out. I'll link as well. Yeah, so those will be very exciting. Keep an eye out for those seminars and follow on Instagram. I think we're gonna wrap up the episode here. Thank you so much for joining, Henry. I think we had a wonderful conversation. Lots of, signposts pointing off in the direction of more areas of research for folks who are listening. So I'll try and sort of put an outline in the description for here's some of the things we mentioned that you can go learn more about. And perhaps we will discuss in greater detail in future podcast episodes. But thank you so much for joining me. A wonderful conversation. And thank you to you for listening. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining me today, pole dancer. This podcast is a production of Slink Through Strength, the inclusive, evidence-based online pole studio. So if you're looking for a place to train, either off-pole conditioning and flexibility, or learning pole tricks and refining your pole movement, you can find us online at slinkthroughstrength.com.